Again, that's the president of the United States as he gets on a plane, again, headed to Kentucky and Ohio. And he is going to be talking about the economy, and it's something that everyone is talking about. Whether you care about how much it's costing for you to fill up your tank, you might have just opened up your energy bill. I had a friend that was like, wow, I need to downsize my home. The economy is really affecting people in so many ways. It's one of the reasons why we've rung him up again. Timothy Chubb, CIO at Girard. We do appreciate you hanging out with us. So you see the president there. You know he's headed to talk about the economy. You are not surprised.
Yeah, no, I think affordability has been coming back into the headlines, once again, so far this year, and it's actually coming on a day where we got some news about February, consumer prices, the CPI index that showed some stability so far this year, but unfortunately, I think all that stability. On the surface is kind of stale underneath at this point, given what's been transpiring with Iran and oil and gas prices after the last couple of weeks of conflict there.
You talk to people all the time about their money, and their money is different depending on where you are, right? There's Kardashian money, there's Jen Frederick money, I got a kid in college, he's worried about his money. Generally, when we look at the economy, when we look at grocery prices, gasoline, the electric bill, like, what do people care about first? What is the first thing that they're like, whoa, it's happening, inflation's real, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination of factors, like you said. Every consumer is a bit different, but energy and prices are really a large portion of the American household budget. It's definitely gone down over time as we've become much more of a service-based economy in the last 20 years. But overall, it's still about 20 to 25% of the American household budget, whether it's filling up the tank or heating your home. And so we did see gasoline prices fall about 5.5% in the February inflation report, but unfortunately, they're up about 25% since then, with crude oil hitting $90 a barrel today.
So I think we heard somewhere one member of the administration said, this is going to be over in 5 weeks. We're going to be fine in 5 weeks. And by that, I mean the conflict. And I think it was part of a larger conversation that was being had about this isn't going to be like a prolonged thing. But 5 weeks, I mean, it doesn't immediately adjust back to below $3 at the gas pump, right? It will take some time after the conflict to rebound, if you will, or to reestablish where we were. How long does that actually take?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's unfortunately a question that we're all asking ourselves as investors today. One of the major headlines that came out that has been moving markets was the International Energy Agency, excuse me, the IEA. They actually announced the largest emergency oil release in history, just to bring more supply into the market to help prices start to normalize a little bit. The most recent release of all these oil reserves was actually back in 2022. That was the largest at the time. This is more than double that. And unfortunately, we have seen oil prices respond today by moving higher, and so that would ultimately result, I guess, in our view, that the market investors are a bit more worried about just the timing of how long this conflict may take, when we can potentially see oil prices normalize. And so 10 million barrels a day are flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. This basically covers 40 days of a disruption. And obviously, we don't hope, and especially for our service members, that it lasts that long. But it's just somewhat of kind of how the market's been interpreting the length of how long this could ultimately impact gasoline prices.
I have presented to you several times that I do not study the markets like you do. That's your job. My job is to look at this computer and look at the notes here. And one of the things that I'm seeing, which gave me a what? I remember this time last week, we said the market cannot bear $100 a barrel. And we woke up on Monday morning, 120. This thingy right here that I'm reading from a very reputable source says oil prices could go to 150. Are you, are, what do we do with that?
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah. Every $10 of increase in the price of oil, translates to about 25 cents at the pump. So the swings that we've seen within the oil markets within the last week have been unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's trading around like Bitcoin. It's been extremely volatile as investors are just trying to get a sense of how long this will last. Ultimately, how are refineries being impacted and the like. And 150 dollars a barrel would definitely be the worst case scenario. I think from a strategic standpoint, that's really what Iran's probably pushing for. However, you can see between the IEA as well as other countries that have been looking to mitigate that risk and bring more oil into the market on the supply side to prevent oil prices from getting out of hand and up to those levels. So that would certainly be a headwind for the growth of our U.S. and global economy. It would be a contributing force to higher rates of inflation, and unfortunately, really complicate the Federal Reserve, who many, including ourselves, would expect them to cut interest rates again, a couple times later this year. And if inflation's not moving in the right direction, closer to that 2% number, it's definitely going to give them some pause. And they're meeting next week to talk about trajectory of rates for their March FOMC meeting.
Hmm. I was hoping you'd give us some good news, but no. Listen, we appreciate you stopping by, and we like that you can explain it with credibility, but in a way that we can all understand. And please dig in that briefcase and find some good news for the next time that we see you. Okay?
Yeah, we'll do. Hopefully, we'll move past this conflict shortly, and we'll get back down at $3 a gallon again.